Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
We'd like to get a budget that represents the interests of the people who are standing here with me now.
To be part of the struggle to achieve a better society for all.
I'm very compassionate to what's happening upstate. And I'm very compassionate to what's happening downstate.
Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Liz Koenig. Today we're going to be discussing the final budget. We'll also be talking about legislation designed to help police officers with crisis training. And joining to discuss these topics is Assemblymember Walter Mosley, who represents the 57th Assembly District in Brooklyn. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get into the final budget agreement and some of the other issues we want to talk about, I would like to talk a little bit about Assemblyman Frank Scartatos.
Yeah. This morning I got up and heard the news that he had passed away. And last week we were told that he was gravely ill, and he represents a part of the state of New York where I have family members in Newburgh, who live in Newburgh. So he represents portions of Newburgh and Poughkeepsie. And he was a colleague who I learned a lot from. He didn't say much, but his demeanor, his temperament spoke loudly. And we're going to miss that in the chamber, given these times in which we're in.
Yeah, he was a gentleman, always.
Always a gentleman, always brought to the forefront what else is important to New York State. We know that Wall Street kind of is like the major component of our economic engine, but he also understood that our agricultural industry is just as important, if not more so, as well as environmental conservation issues, which clearly was at the forefront of his mind. It was policies in which he advocated for on a daily basis. So he's going to be missed, and my hearts and condolences go out to his staff and his family and friends.
Absolutely. Let's move on now and talk about the final budget. It's been a couple of weeks now since the budget was passed, and it was another marathon, getting it in on time. But
Correct.
With the religious observances, it was important to get this done. So just talk a little bit about the final budget, what you're happy about, what you're not so happy about.
Well, obviously, we're pleased to know that the people of New York can count on us in having an on-time budget so they can plan accordingly. The municipalities, school districts, all of them can kind of go about business as usual without having to face the uneasy question of what's happening in Albany in our efforts to go forward. It's a $168.3 billion budget, an increase of $1 billion from last year. Pleased with what we were able to do with Foundation Aid, although we haven't satisfied the entire CFA ruling. We're getting closer each and every year. Pleased with some of the provisions we made for affordable housing, dealing with people, those who are displaced, those who are individuals who might be on the verge of homelessness, those who are coming from stricken communities like Puerto Rico and Mexico and elsewhere, coming to New York and giving them the resources to be placed in a decent and affordable place to live. And clearly we're also pleased with some of the sexual harassment policy initiatives that were put in place in an effort to make sure that New York remains at the forefront of dealing with this issue that is kind of struck the nation all at once. But then there's some things that we're not pleased with. The criminal justice package that we wanted to put in place in our efforts to close Rikers in New York City in particular. We want to actually be a part of that. And to be a part of that, you have to reduce population. We just don't want to close Rikers and then open up a whole bunch of other Rikers Islands all throughout the 5 boroughs. So hopefully we'll be able to pass it through our House, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same in the upper House and the Senate, in an effort for the governor to sign this off into law. So those are the things that I'm pleased with. Not so pleased with the criminal justice initiative, but I'm sure we'll continue to do the people's work as we see out these next few weeks towards the end of the session. And
session will be winding down, so hopefully we can get some of these issues that were left out of the budget. And they're more policy issues anyway, right? I mean,
yeah, they are. Obviously, there are 3 components. There's the monetary, there's the Article 7, and then there's the policy. And obviously the policy is important because we understand that it's easier to get policy through on the budget side as opposed to it going through the arduous task of going through our House, then being argued and renegotiated and going through the Senate before the governor signs off on it. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to deal with the issues of speedy trial reform, bail reform, grand jury reform, in an effort to make sure that we have a more efficient sustainable criminal justice system, which ultimately leads to a fairer criminal justice system.
Now, how have you been reaching out to your constituents to inform them of what's included in the budget and what's not included in the budget?
Well, just yesterday, we had a Facebook town hall, which we always have, just to keep people up to date as to what's going on in real time. It also gives them an opportunity to question me as their a public elected official in the Assembly, to find out what is being done that is germane to them and their family or to their community or neighborhood. But it is something that we also understand that everybody can't be everywhere at the same time. So in an effort to use technology and to utilize technology that other people are using, Facebook provides us with that platform. And it's a well-attended town hall, always a great a mixture of questions, whether they be public policy or fiscal or both. And we're pleased that we had quite a number of people on this town hall, and we're looking forward to having other town halls like this, both using technology, social media, but also using the more traditional settings of having it in an actual town hall.
In person, yes, yeah. Now, you do a lot of these, though. I mean, how do your constituents find out when they are, and so they can,
Well, normally we do a robocall, more traditional use of technology in terms of, contacting everybody either through their landline phones or their cell phones to inform them of what's going on. Then we might do a mailing. And in that mailing, we'll have like a list of upcoming events. And then we'll just obviously inform people, as the days leading up to the event through our various social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and the like, so that we don't leave out any segment of our community population that utilizes these forms of communications.
Now, let's move on and talk about a terrible, tragic incident that happened in your district. And that was with this gentleman, Saheed Vassal. What can you tell us about it?
Well, unfortunately, over the holidays, this young man who many had known to have some form of mental illness was acting very peculiar on a particular day and had a particularly peculiar instrument in his hand. And unfortunately, a lot of people, there were several 311 calls that were made to the police department. Plainclothes police officers, a particular gun unit, a plainclothes gun unit responded, and as a result, with the confrontation between Mr. Blackwell and these plainclothes officers, resulted in his death. And unfortunately, these were shots that were fired by police, and Mr. Blackwell had what appeared to be, or what was reported to be, a gun, but really was a piece of metal instrument formed and shaped and carried like it was a gun. And unfortunately, the young man who has mental illness, it was diagnosed as such by his family, but was not receiving the necessary treatment, lost his life. And the community, wanted answers, and the community is still demanding answers. But at the same time, we also have to understand that what we want to do is what we don't want to do is repeat this again, whether it be here in the city or elsewhere throughout the state of New York.
So you're proposing legislation that would help prevent this from happening?
Yeah, well, right now, based on a January 2017 report by the police department, by the NYPD, it showed that the need for increased sensitivity and training when it comes to crisis intervention is necessary for our police force. But right now, what the report doesn't call is that it is an option for current and future NYPD officers to do so. What my piece of legislation would do would make it mandatory that all officers, current and future, receive this type of training. Studies have shown, and it's actually documented in the NYPD rulings, that up until 2016, 18%, it topped off at 18% of all interaction between police officers and perpetrators were involved people who had some form of mental illness. That number increased to 25% just from 2017. We also believe that this would also create for a safer environment for our police officers as well, because anytime you can de-escalate without using violence, without using lethal force, or deadly force makes for a safer environment for our officers as well. So this is just not for the public, obviously, who is basically is mainly geared for, but it's also geared for our police officers to make them, I think, better trained officers to have a safer environment for themselves in an effort so that everybody can come home safely.
Right. And what can we do as a society to help prevent this from happening?
Well, I think we have to understand that mental health is just as important as any type of health issue that we're dealing with, whether it's the physical body, the mental state of mind is critically important, if not equally as important, when we're dealing with health issues. And we can't leave out of that conversation, the mental side, the psychological side of being healthy. And to me, I think that with technology and with the advancement of medicine, we're able to determine not only gross forms of mental illness, but very acute forms of mental illness that I think is critical in our efforts to interact with one another, our ability to engage, and our ability to respect one another.
And we've also talked about the mental health issue when it comes to gun violence perpetrated by citizens who
Yes.
are diagnosed with mental illness. Where are we now in the fight to prevent people who have mental health issues from obtaining weapons?
Well, in our budget, we were able to address that issue. We were able to address that issue in the sense that those individuals who are involved in domestic violence, right now, it was only certain felonies in which one would be able to not get access to a gun. A lot of times, sometimes we see that people who are mentally ill, are involved in other forms of crimes that are lower grade crimes. And as a result, we were able to put in our legislation, we were able to put in policy within the budget, which would prevent individuals like that who are involved in some form of domestic violence, which a lot of people who are mentally ill are involved in domestic violence, from ascertaining a firearm, whether it be a rifle or automatic weapon or the like. So we have to continue to evolve and continue to deal with the issue of mental illness, and understanding that they are involved in all forms and facets of public policy, and whether we're dealing with public safety, whether we're dealing with health issues, whether we're dealing with housing, mental illness has to always be a part of that conversation, because in some form or fashion, all of us deal with mental illness. Some of us are able to deal with it better than others, and some of us have acute forms of mental illness that we might not even know we have. So, we have to understand that we are all exposed to this, and that we all have to be kind of a part of the conversation.
And I'm sure everybody knows somebody who
Certainly.
was mentally ill or
Yes.
has been affected by it. So
Yes.
it's definitely a conversation that we should continue to have. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for the update.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We've been speaking with Assemblyman Walter Mosley, who represents the 57th Assembly District in Brooklyn. Thank you so much for joining us here on Assembly Update. We'll see you again next time.